another exciting episode. I am super excited about this conversation. I think I have a treat for you guys. I think you guys are really going to enjoy hearing from this young man. So, in this episode, my good friend Zach, which he is going to introduce himself to you here real soon, he will share some candid moments about his journey. Each of his testimonies, each is a testimony to the power of perseverance and the strength of human spirit. As we explore his experiences, you'll discover how he turned obstacles into stepping stones and how his insights can empower you to face your own challenges and encourage and hope. Zach's message is one of inspiration and motivation, reminding us all that no matter how difficult the path may seem, we have the power to overcome and thrive. So grab your headphones and settle in as we embark on this uplifting conversation. You don't want to miss a moment of Zach's incredible story. It's a journey that could change your perspective and ignite your own passion for personal growth. So let's get started. Zach, I kind of, told everybody what your first name is, but man, I cannot do your introduction the justice that you will. So if you don't mind, my friend, could you like introduce yourself to our audience and just tell them who you are, where you came from, and all the great and wonderful things about Zach?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief here. You know that there's a lot. But my name is Zach Tidwell, and I'm a 29-year-old Marine Corps veteran, and I'm completely blind. I lost my sight almost 6 years ago now to a suicide attempt. So I was struggling with depression from a bad combination of head injuries and personal circumstances, and I really just didn't have any healthy coping skills. So about 9 months after I was honorably discharged, I held a gun between my eyes and pulled the trigger. And there, as you can imagine, there was a big recovery process from all of that. But in the years since, I've completely redefined myself and dug myself out of that hole, even though I've been in other literal and figurative dark places since,
Yeah,
waking up from shooting yourself in the face to find that not only did you not die, but you've maimed yourself forever
yeah,
is kind of a tough pill to swallow. But today I'm a self-taught, award-winning software developer and entrepreneur, making the digital world a more accessible place for everyone. I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, and an athlete. And I do a lot of things that people wouldn't think are possible for someone in my position to do. And now I talk about all of this stuff and the hard lessons that I've had to learn through my own mistakes that I hope will save other people's lives and open up conversations around these, what are generally more taboo subjects that I really don't think should be, and people should be able to express and have well thought out conversations on because these are things that need to be talked about, and hiding them and holding them in like I was doing leading up to my suicide attempt kills people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I thank you for that level of transparency. Trust me, I know that as they heard you say that, like I was when I first heard it, when I first heard your story, I was like, wow. You know what I'm saying? It's like I remember because I was in a very dark space at one particular point in time as well, and I contemplated it. But of course, for me, I had children, and one of the things that prevented me to doing that is like considering the fact that I would leave my children fatherless. So that kind of helped to give me more of a reason to, continue with my life and, just kind of like reformat my life and try to do something to build a legacy for them. But if you don't mind, because this is not about me, I want to make this conversation all about you. Uh,
Okay.
if we can kind of back up just a little bit, because first and foremost, thank you for your service. For most of you who don't understand, the Marine Corps, in my opinion, is the toughest branch of service. I don't care what nobody tell you. I'm an Army vet. And trust me, I've trained with Marines, and trust me, all the way down to just their physical fitness standards is very difficult. So again, thank you for your service, sir. Um,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah. Let's kind of go back to the moment, if you will, not the moment that you decided to pull the trigger, but the things that led up to that, because I think people need to understand what it's like especially for men, right? What it's like when we're in a depressive state. And I say this all the time because men don't get the luxury of expressing their feelings and people accepting how they're actually feeling in those particular moments. So can you kind of like share some of the things that you went through and why you felt you couldn't express yourself to others?
Yeah, and I want to touch on what you just mentioned. I've, as you can imagine, I talk about this stuff a lot. This has been my way to turn this into a positive, right? I can hopefully prevent someone else from going down the same path that I went down. So, in talking about that, a lot of people open up and give me a little insight like you just did. And it honestly seems like most people that I talk to have either, I would say almost everyone that I talk to has either dealt with suicide directly or knows someone who has, or at at the very least, something like along the lines of what you just said comes up. It's sad, and people don't realize, and I didn't even realize how prevalent of an issue it is. But for me, there was a lot going on with me. So I was married and on my second deployment while I was still deployed. And I'm not a combat vet. Both of my deployments were into the Pacific. There was no combat whatsoever. But I was a machine gunner. I was an infantryman in the Marines. And on my second deployment, I found out that my wife was having an affair, and I tried to make things work. So I found out in late 2017, came back, things didn't work out, and I finally called it quits in January of 2018. I wasn't in a great spot, but I was dealing with things. I was just keeping myself very busy, and physicality and exercise have always been something that were huge for me, but that became really my solace was just exhausting myself every day.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't happy, but I was dealing with it healthfully, as much as you can. And then one of the things that I was doing to keep myself really busy was I was really, really into motorcycles. And so I would take my dirt bike out to the racetrack on the weekends. And in March of 2018, I was in a really nasty wreck where I still don't know what happened. I really don't have any memory of it other than kind of vaguely picking up my dirt bike on the backside of a jump. And everything else has been filled in after that. And we can get into that later if you want, but I'll skip over it for now.
True.
It was after that that I really started to spiral. I became very impulsive and very agitative, and I started being unhappy turned into depression. And the first time that I've ever dealt with depression, I'd never been taken by this really just senseless discontentment and the heaviness and the just weird. It's like dulls everything. It's I'd never experienced that before, and the big thing that came along with that, and I couldn't sleep, and I would just lay in bed awake thinking about everything that had happened with my ex-wife, and then if I did finally fall asleep, it was 2 or 3 hours of sleep, and then I'm up in the middle of the night because I just woke up sweating thinking about it, and now I'm thinking about it again, and I was just exhausted, and I found out that drinking, a couple drinks before bed would ease that, and then I could fall asleep. But a couple drinks turned into more drinks, and eventually I developed a problem. And this continued through August of that same year when I was honorably discharged. So I'd finished my 4 years. I got out and started going to college to become an ER nurse. That was what I wanted to do, which is a total shift from being a machine gunner. But I
Absolutely.
still, for whatever reason, that called to me, and that's what I wanted to do. So
Okay.
working full time, going to school full time, and I just kept getting into a darker and darker place. And I wasn't speaking up for two reasons, I guess three. I, especially being an infantryman in the Marine Corps, I thought bitches spoke up, right? I thought that was a
Right.
sign of weakness. So I wasn't going to do that. And I thought that what I was going through was just I didn't take into account or recognize the weight of the head injury.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was like, this is what people go through when they go through this stuff. This is a normal thing, and I'll get through it. I'll keep my mouth shut and drink because that's what we did in the Marines. So coupled with that is I have suicide on both sides of my family and even murder suicide on my mom's side of the family. And I had formed some very strong opinions about people who went that route. I thought that they were pussies and that was I thought it was a coward's way out. So I never thought that would be me. And but as I kept progressing through, this is August of 2018 through the end of the year and into the next, I became more and more apathetic about things and was having to force myself to go do things outside of what was required of me. I was showing up to the gym every morning, going to school and getting straight A's and doing well at work, but everything outside of that was just, I would try and make myself go out and go snowboarding. I'd drive a couple hours up to the mountains, get there, still not want to be there. And so I'd sit in my truck and pretend like I went snowboarding so that no one was
Mm.
tipped off to anything when I got back. I did the same thing with going to the racetrack, and it was a lot of this stuff. It's I was keeping up appearances, trying to pretend that I wasn't struggling, and it kept progressing. So in March of 2019, about a year after the accident, I'd reached a point one night where I had decided I don't know what, like, I don't remember what led to it, and I was stone cold sober that night, which was, I was drinking most nights by this point. Again, I was still
Yeah.
doing everything and being very productive and successful from the outside looking in, but I was just being a real piece of shit. So I was stone cold sober, and for whatever reason, I had the idea, having never mishandled a firearm in my life. I was a military brat. I grew up around guns, and then as an infantryman, my job was guns.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I cleared out my Glock that night and decided, okay, I'm gonna hold it up to my head and see what it feels like. And I held it to different spots on my head and decided that I would shoot myself in between the eyes because that's where I had been trained to shoot other people in the head because it's supposed to. The idea is that if you hit in that little T box between your eyebrows and like the upper bridge of your nose, that'll hit the medulla oblongata, which is where all of your autonomous nerve or autonomous bodily functions are regulated, and it's just the off button. So
Yeah.
that was March 27th of 2019, and 4 days later, I shot myself. And
Yeah.
in the time in between, my parents had come over to my apartment the day before I shot myself and thought I was grumpy and tired, but what person who's, grumpy wasn't outside of my baseline by that point. Like I said, I was very agitated and probably just miserable to be around by that point. But I was also going to school full time and working full time. So a lot of stress going on there. But so
Yeah.
they just didn't think anything of it. And the next day on March 31st, I decided I was going to make a video instead of writing a note. And I also decided, even though I knew that I'd identified my way out a couple days beforehand, like, all right, I need a little liquid courage for this. So I started having some drinks, and I don't know that I would have gone through with it if I hadn't drank that day. But
Yeah.
I I started making that video. That was I that was the first time that I had ever actually opened up about how bad I was struggling, was to my camera on my phone, trying to record this video to my parents and to my two younger sisters. And so it naturally got a little dragged out because, I lost my composure in the middle of it. But my roommate actually came home early from work while I was in the middle of recording that. So I pushed pause, and I don't remember any of this. This is all me being filled in as well.
Yeah.
I paused the video, went out into the kitchen and talked to him like nothing was wrong. And, we were shooting the shit. I asked him how work went. Yeah, cool. You gonna be on Xbox later? And he's like, yeah, I'll finish up with dinner and do the dishes, and then I'll be on. And I went back to my room, and shortly after he finished up in the kitchen and went back to his, the gun went off, and he found me in my room with a bullet hole in my forehead.
Man,
Yeah.
that's a lot, brother. I'm as I'm processing this, and I'm sure as other people are listening to this, I pray that they're feeling a large degree of compassion because the first thing as I'm listening to all of this one of the things I think about is like your support system, right? And the question that I want to ask you is like, sure, you mentioned your roommate. You mentioned going to school, so you have classmates as well. Then you mentioned you was leaving a video for your parents. Like, what was your support system like? Like, could they not notice that you were in a particular place, or was it like how we normally do as men? We'll put on a particular facade to make them believe that everything is okay. And I'm only talking through the lens of my experience when I ask this question now. You
Yeah.
put on a particular facade to make them believe that everything is okay. But then once that conversation is over, once you leave their space, you go back to where you were. Like, I'm just kind of curious if you can kind of help us understand that.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I don't get asked this very much. So I was a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B on that.
Okay.
I, like I mentioned, I was doing my best to keep up a facade, but when I had gotten out of the Marines, my parents had offered, hey, if you get back in school, you can live here rent free. So that's what I was doing initially from what? Because I got to get out a month early on terminal leave. So I went on terminal leave in July of 2018 and through I think December or January, I had lived there. But it things did come to a head with them, which is why I wound up in that getting an apartment with my buddy from high school. We had My mom and I have always kind of butt heads, but like I said, I was very agitative and I was not open to talking about anything. So when she would bring up things with my ex-wife, I don't know why, we, she probably saw that I was struggling, probably saw that I was drinking too much, even though I was doing everything that I needed to get done and doing well in those things. I was getting pretty sloshed most nights. And I think she saw that. And so she would press me on these things. I would ask her to leave me alone and she would keep pushing. And it would one night specifically, she'd been bothering me about it. I'd had some drinks and we got into a bit of an argument about it. And I raised my voice and she wound up recording part of that and leaving out the rest of the context of the fact that, this had been an escalation. She just recorded me yelling at her and my dad was out of town, so she showed it to him when he got back, and then they kicked me out of the house. Um, so that was, I don't know, a month and some change, 2 months before I shot myself.
Yeah.
So I'd kind of burned that bridge, and so it was a combination of there was that, but right before that had happened, also, I have two younger sisters. My next closest sister is 11 years younger than me. There's a huge age gap. So,
Okay.
uh, but it had in January. Yeah, so I guess I got kicked out in January because her birthday's in January. Our family always does a meal of someone's choosing for their birthday, whether that's breakfast or do you want to go to dinner somewhere? Like
Yeah.
that has always been our family thing. Um, the so the plan in January on her birthday was to go out to breakfast to go get some crazy dessert pancakes somewhere. And everyone was ready to go and I wasn't up and ready to go. So my parents thought maybe I just slept in through my alarm and they went to go, wake me up. And I was passed out on the floor with a bottle of whiskey next to me or whatever liquor I'd been drinking that night. And that was kind of those two things were like the straws that broke the camel's back. So
Yeah.
I had kind of isolated myself from them. I was definitely isolating myself just in general. And I could have spoken up to my buddies from the Marines, but again, I thought that was weak. So I didn't. I was going to get through it. And because I had been able to just grit my teeth through everything up to that point so far, especially in the Marines, I thought that that would apply to the mental health side of things. And I was wrong.
Yeah.
Yep.
Man. Yeah. I'm listening to this, and I don't think you realize how closely aligned our stories are. Because during my era, when I was in that dark space, I would find solace in the bottom of a bottle of vodka. That was my thing.
Yeah.
And it was as I reflect back on it, it was a very dangerous thing for me. And again, I was more mild than anything. I wouldn't go out looking for trouble. I'm not saying that you did, but I'm just saying that would just be me. Like I would do it in the comforts of wherever I was at that particular point in time, or sometimes I would be someplace and of course I would get a designated driver. And there would be thoughts, right? I would have thoughts like, what would it be like if, I can solve these problems if.
Yeah.
These things wouldn't be such a big concern if. And like I said, I just got to the point in thought one night. I just realized that for me, that I would be doing more harm than good. Um, and this might be a very difficult question, and if it is, I do apologize in advance. What was the tipping point, if you can recall? What was the tipping point?
Yeah. That's so that's what I was saying that night on March 27th when I held my gun to my head. I don't necessarily remember there being a specific thing. I do remember being tired of being so tired.
Yeah,
I felt that it was inescapable, which is so crazy to say now because I realize how impactful just speaking up in the time since I've been blind, when I've been struggling, how much of a difference that's made. And but I did not see that as even an option. I just didn't even consider it. So and something I talk about a lot in talking about this, I really and like I said, I don't know that I would have gone through with it on the day of because I was drinking, but I was stone cold sober that night that I decided. And like I found solace in the fact that, okay, it was like, like, okay, I have a way out. I can't
yeah,
escape it. And any other way, nothing else I've done is working, even though obviously there were so many avenues of helping myself there that I wasn't taking advantage of. But I I did not even consider what that was going to do to my family, which I know sounds weird because I made that video to my family, but like I didn't cross my mind really. It was I need a way out of this because it felt inescapable. And I also think that, with that, you're at that point on March 27th, I had surpassed the point of rational thinking. I don't think someone that has reached that point is in a sane state of mind anymore.
yeah,
Because that goes against everything. I mean, that goes against your body's genetics. You're encoded to do everything you can to survive. And when your
yep,
brain tricks yourself into thinking that the best option is ending your life, I don't like that seems unjustifiable in any outside of it being an insane thought. But again, because when you follow that a couple days forward, and my parents and my little sisters were a couple feet away from where my gun was that I just held to my head a couple days
yeah,
before, and I could have said something and like didn't even cross my mind that I remember.
mm,
And so that's because I've heard a couple people say like you, and speaking about this, like, yeah, well, I thought of my family and I realized, okay, that's not a real option because of what that would leave behind. But that honestly, I don't remember that crossing my mind at all.
yeah,
I was in so much pain that I wanted out.
yeah, man. Yeah, I do understand that. And so you mentioned your recovery, and you said you had an insane recovery up to this point. Um, as you went through your recovery, can you kind of like walk us through that into what your life is like now?
Yeah, so it's a little ridiculous. I when they took me off of life support, and so I guess actually when my roommate had called 911, I guess I woke up. Again, don't remember any of this, but like I was asking for help and asking for water and eventually became so combative with like the EMTs and stuff that they had to sedate me. And then when I got to the hospital, I got put on life support. And when they took me off of it, I was so messed up, I think from a combination of the concussive force of the gunshot, because none of the bullet actually entered my brain.
Mm,
So I shot myself right between the eyes, and everything that I'm touching right now from this corner next to my left eye, across my forehead, and the bridge of my nose, and my sinuses and this right eye socket are all a big titanium plate now.
mm,
All that was gone, but I was so out of it just from the concussive force of it and all the medications that I was on that I could have a conversation with you right now, or like we are right now. But I was seeing things, and I mean, just settings that didn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it no one could get it across to me that I was blind and that that stuff wasn't real. So it was I don't know what it was like for them trying to navigate that, but it was kind of a mess, and no one really knew what was going to happen, if I was still going to be me. And eventually I just, yeah, I continued to heal. They kept the bullet hole open in my forehead for about 40 days and packed it with gauze twice a day. That was like the wound care for it, because they used the bullet hole for the facial reconstruction surgery to try and reduce some of the scarring, to
Yeah.
slide the plate into my face. So they kept the bullet hole open and extended it like between both of my eyes and then up my forehead to slide the plate in. But the hospital, all in all, was 51 days. And then I wound up going to blind rehab for 2.5 months after that, where I kind of went to school basically for 7 hours a day to learn how to do basic things without any sight.
Yeah.
And especially because I'm deaf in one ear as well, like for me, learning to navigate with my cane out and about, especially with like, crossing streets and stuff, where I had to, you have to listen to traffic and decide when it's your time to walk, because
Yeah.
those chirping poles or stoplights aren't very common. But so I was there for a long time for that stuff, and wound up a total of 8.5. So in December of that same year, it was 8.5 months after I shot myself, I was snowboarding again. And that was my first taste of independence, where like I was like, okay, I've got something back here. And I had decided in the hospital when we found out that I was going to be completely blind, because it was kind of dropped on us, because they had said that, yeah, when you do have your facial reconstruction surgery, you'll get some sight back in your left eye. We don't know how much, but because my right optic nerve was severed completely and my left one is intact, it wound up dying from all of the swelling. But when they dropped it on us, I remembered when my parents were like, well, maybe you could get a guide dog, and maybe you could do this. Maybe you could be, a counselor or something. And the first thing that came to my mind was in our chow hall on base where I was stationed. The salt and pepper shakers said in really fine print, made proudly by the blind and visually impaired. So my parents were throwing out like, hey, you could be a therapist or whatever. And said, I'm not making fucking salt and pepper shakers. That was my response was,
Right. Right.
I'm not going to be a bump on a log. I'm a Marine and I've wanted more for my life, and I'm not going to let what I've done to myself stop me from doing something more meaningful.
Yeah.
Nothing against blind people who wind up doing that stuff, but that wasn't what I wanted for myself. So
Yeah.
I I chased my independence and getting back into the things that I used to do. So snowboarding 8.5 months later, I was back in college a month after that. I was back out on my own another 6 months later, and I just kept moving forward. And I finally started to grieve what I had done to myself. I think because the pace of everything had slowed down, and I was fully back out on my own, and I was very isolated, not knowing anyone in Denver, where I had moved to go to college. And it was also the middle of the lockdowns, because I bought my first house at the end of 2020. And in the early 2021, I still think I went through the most severe depression that I've ever been through,
Yeah.
even outside of before I shot myself, because I just it was like everything finally hit me, and I was seeing how difficult life was for me in navigating everything completely blind. And it just, for whatever reason, it hit me. And but that was also a huge learning step forward for me, because, or a big learning step for me moving forward, because I reached a point where I recognized that I didn't want to be here anymore. It wasn't logical, but when is that logical? I mean, I already kind of said my thoughts on that, but I recognized that. And I was terrified to speak up, because I thought that I was going to get taken to a psych ward. I thought the cops would be called and I'd be whisked away to the psych ward and I'd be sedated to the point of, basically being a zombie, and then I'd be stuck there until someone deemed that I was fit to leave. But I knew I had learned where not speaking up would get me, and so I did. And I took that leap, and I still think that's probably the bravest thing that I've ever done. And I told my psychologist, hey, I don't know why I don't want to be here, but I feel like I want to die and I'm having these thoughts. I'm not going to act on it. I do not want to act on it, but I'm having these thoughts. I don't know what to do. And broke down, as you can imagine, while we were having that conversation, but no cops were called. She made sure that I didn't have a plan and that I wasn't going to hurt myself. And then she was just there for me. And we went from
Yeah.
talking once a week to every day and sometimes multiple times a day. And that lasted several months. But I learned in going through all of that, I learned some very effective coping skills that I still use today when I'm going through ruts. But more specifically, is the fact that, okay, I've been through this now and gotten through it. And I've
Mhm.
seen that it can and will get better if I show up and do the work. If I have the balls to speak up and actually, working through those things that are bothering you are it's not fun, it's not a comfortable process and it sucks and it's not a quick fix either, but it can get better if you keep showing up. And so that was a huge step for me. And that lasted several months. By the time that the middle of 2021 rolled around, I was still going to school this whole time, and I had actually, up to that point, I had been taking all of my English classes and things like that that were more research focused because I mean, you've met Marines before. Math is a tough subject for Marines anyways. And I'm also completely blind, and it is notoriously a difficult thing for blind people just because the technology isn't really there to like support it. And
Yeah.
math is pretty visual when you think about how you do it. I mean, you write all that stuff out because that helps you process through it. So I'd been avoiding it, but I finally had to take my first statistics class. And the I'd part of the things that I'd learned over the past year and a half at that point was, or I guess 2 years, but what was how to use screen reading technology. Like that's how I've joined this Zoom meeting and emailed back and forth with you and stuff like that. But my school was also legally obligated to convert all of my materials into formats that I could use so that I could be independent. And they didn't do that for my math class. Instead, they assigned a sighted student to be my eyeballs for the class. So to do homework and to take tests, we had to get on Zoom and
Mhm.
she would read problems to me. I would use my talking scientific calculator and do incremental equations, tell her part of the answer or record it in a Word document so I could go back through and add up these different values that I was getting later. And then give her the answer. She'd enter it in the software for me, and then we'd move on to the next question. And that pissed me off because the school was legally obligated to do otherwise and they weren't doing it. And also, by this point, I was living on my own. I had my own house. I was skiing, I was rock climbing, I was whitewater kayaking, and I was had recently started Brazilian jiu-jitsu too. And I'm doing all that against people without disabilities. But if you sat a statistics assignment in front of me, I couldn't do it because other people weren't doing what they needed to do. So
Yeah.
I started researching what that, well, I guess take a step back. The night that we took my first exam is actually when I guess, rediscovered or discovered that I was an alcoholic. For some reason, it hadn't registered to me before that I was an alcoholic because even though I had struggled with it leading up to my suicide attempt, to me, I wasn't an alcoholic because I wasn't sleeping on the streets or falling asleep on a bus and pissing myself in front of a bunch of people. I was still living this very productive life.
Yeah.
And so to blow off some steam after our first exam, I ordered alcohol, and that ended up kicking off 2.5 years of just horrendous alcoholism. But got so bad at one point that I was binging for 2 or 3 days at a time and just being blacked out the whole time.
Mm.
Then I'd recover for 2 or 3 days and I'd do it all over again.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I said, I started researching, okay, how come I can pay my mortgage but not my HOA dues, or how come I can write my English papers but not do my math homework? And I found out that it all came down to the code running behind the scenes of each piece of software that I was accessing, whether that be an app or a website or whatever else. What I was reading online told me that developers had to take specific steps to make these things accessible. And so I decided that I was going to drop out of college and become part of the solution. So I started teaching myself how to code in October of 2021. and my first app was released in October of 2023. I'd been struggling with alcohol that whole time and been trying to get sober for, I would at least, of the 2.5 years I was sober or I was like actively drinking, I would say that I was probably trying to get sober for 2 years and 3 months of that at least.
Yeah.
Um, but when I had finally started making progress, when I had finally accepted that I needed help, I had tried AA, I'd tried an outpatient um, substance abuse program, and then finally went to inpatient rehab. And while I was at literally like near the tail end of me being at the inpatient rehab facility, I was diagnosed with a horrible genetic disease called Huntington's disease, and it's
Mm.
incurable and will eventually degrade my speech and movement and brain tissue is to the point where I'm basically a vegetable, and then something else will kill me, like pneumonia. And so then I really leaned into the self-pity side of things even more, and that was my new excuse to drink. And so that continued through the 4th of July in 2023 is when my first app came out. And I had made something that looked and functioned normally for people who could see and who had no disabilities, whether no matter who used it, it was accessible to everyone. If someone was
Yeah.
colorblind, it would adapt colors. It would magnify fonts and things like that for people who were low vision. For someone who's totally blind, like myself, their screen readers could use it. And even people who were blind and deaf could use it with these cool things called refreshable braille displays. So they could read braille for everything that was on their iPhone screen. And
Okay.
people with no arms and spinal cord injuries could use it with their voice. And, I finally my work was really well received and actually won a couple awards for what I was doing. And it was like once that was out into the world and I had done and accomplished that, even though what I made was just a word puzzle game. I mean, it wasn't anything crazy technology wise. What I did on the accessibility side of things was huge, but it wasn't some life-changing app, right? It was this form of entertainment that people could play while they were on the bus or something like that. But it was like I'd come full circle then, and I realized I finally I had a purpose again, and I think I've only realized in writing my book over the past year and some change that like I didn't have an identity anymore. When I shot myself, I lost all that, and it
Mm.
was like I really feel that I had that back once that app was out because then I was a software developer and I was doing something that was actually helping people as even though it was just a word puzzle game, I was getting
Yeah.
these really sweet emails from people like you just I felt validated and like I'd come full circle and like I was finally putting something into the world. And that's when I started making progress with alcoholism. So I made it like a month sober. I made it like 2.5 months sober. And I haven't had a drink since December 5th of 2023 now. And there's been more struggles mental health wise along the way, but that's life. You go
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
stuff and just I've learned the skills to cope with this stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where we're at now is with I'm flying through the second draft of this book and I started my podcast a couple of weeks ago and I'm trying to have these conversations with people kind of to do everything that we talked about in the beginning with
Yeah.
the hope is that this will save somebody else's life and people will learn from my mistakes and also start having these conversations.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure that I link all of your accomplishments in the show notes. I want to make sure that people can go and find the app. I want to make sure that they can find your book and absolutely your podcast as well. And again, congratulations, brother. Congratulations on your sobriety. Congratulations on overcoming what is seems to be like some insurmountable odds to be where you are. I know, my words may not necessarily mean a whole lot, but I can say sincerely, I am proud of you in listening to who you are today from someone who suffered from that type of depression. I'm extremely proud of you, brother. I don't think we do that enough, man to man. I don't think we share that with each other enough.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
yeah, man, absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about. So first of all, let me say this. I want to acknowledge your bravery, bro, because I'm not gonna snowboard. I'm not whitewater guy. I don't swim, so I'm not going to get in the kayak, and I'm surely not going to do rock climbing because I'm afraid of heights. So you doing all those things, man. I just want to make sure shout out to you, man. That is just awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
tell me, what do you do now? Like tell everybody, like, because when we had our conversation previously, and when you reached back out to me and you said I'm the man for your podcast, and when we talked that day, I said, "Yep, you absolutely are." Um, tell people the things that you do. You mentioned public speaking. You mentioned some other things. So kind of tell them who Zach is today.
Okay. Yeah. So that that app that I it, that app that I first made was called Xanagrams, and it won a couple Game of the Year awards for the accessibility stuff. And I actually opened up some speaking opportunities in the tech space, which was nothing that I ever expected to be doing. It has been kind of a wild thing, but I just recently took it off of the App Store because between all of the other things that I have going on and the next software project that I'm working on, I didn't have time to keep up with it. And honestly, the interest in it had died down. So it didn't, you know, the time investment really didn't make sense anymore.
Right.
So that's no longer online, but plugging through this book, the public speaking stuff, whether it's been for, the little bit that I've done in the tech space on accessibility, or specifically a lot of it's been for nonprofit organizations that I do some of this stuff through, like the whitewater kayaking and stuff like that. Or, trying to get more into the motivational side and just, you know, and more less narrow environments is something that I'm really working to do right now. The book, we've got the podcast is called Going In Blind with Zach Tidwell. And then this next software project that I'm working on is trying to address some of the issues that I had in college. And, it's keeping me busy, it's keeping me out of trouble. And I think sports wise, on the list now, I think it's skiing, rock climbing, whitewater kayaking, and jujitsu are like my big things that I do pretty regularly. Everything else outside of that is just opportunities come up, or opportunities that come up. But I've surfed, I've skydived, trying to think of other stuff. I don't know. I've always been an adrenaline junkie, and so I will take any opportunity that I get. If someone's willing to take the chance on me to do,
Yeah.
or enable me to do some of this crazy stuff, I will do it. So
Man,
yeah.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I love it. I love it. Um, So for somebody out there, whether they're a parent, and they're not necessarily sure if their child is in a depressive state, or whether they're a young adult, male or female, doesn't really matter. And they may feel like they're dealing with bouts of depression, what advice would you give to them?
If you're that person dealing with depression, you have to speak up. It's a very blunt thing to say, but at the end of the day, me not speaking up is what got me where I am. And there's a factor of accountability there, right? Like no one can help you if they don't know that you're struggling. So you have to
Yeah.
speak up. In terms of parents, that's a tough one. I don't have kids, so I don't know that I feel qualified to speak on that one, but I will say this. I think a lot of times the warning signs are a lot less overt than people make them out to be,
Mm.
because I think also another strong opinion here, but I feel comfortable in saying this, and because I have survived this, I think there's a difference between someone who wants to die and someone who thinks that they want to die. I think those more overt warning signs come from someone and people who think that they want to die. Those people absolutely still need help. I'm not diminishing the value of that. I'm just saying that I think these are two different, that I think that they present differently, right? I think someone who thinks that they want to die is the person who you might see making some obscure Facebook post or saying obscure things like, well, when they're around a group of friends, well, yeah, well, it'd be better if I wasn't here, or stuff like that. Those more like cliche things that you hear about, those more cliche warning signs. But for me, it was, and I've spoken with other people who had the wherewithal to speak up eventually before they reached the point that I was in, but that have gone through a similar process of actively hiding what what they were struggling with to the extent of keeping up the facade. And I think that's why so often you hear when someone does commit suicide that people weren't expecting it because those things are less overt and we're not taught to recognize that these smaller changes in the baseline, these behavioral changes, like I became very impulsive and very agitative. Just that's just not that's never been how I was before. And it's tough to talk about because it's not something that's easily recognizable and you really have to be in tune with someone to even notice that, and especially with the apathy stuff. But again, I was acting like I wasn't apathetic about things to the extent that I would pretend that I was snowboarding. And that's that's a tough spot. I think the only thing you can do is check in with people. And again, then that does kind of fall back on you to speak up. But
Yeah.
if you notice those changes in someone that you're close with, it's okay to ask, right?
Yeah.
Like it's if you do ask, I think there's past the if you ask intently than saying, "Hey, how are you today?" and you legitimately ask someone and sit down in private and be like, "Hey, Dwayne, I've noticed some changes here. I don't want to suggest that anything's going on, but I've noticed this and this and this, and it's worrying me. What's going on?"
Yeah.
That's I think that's the intervention with that. And again, it's still on that person to speak up, but I think that that's the best way to facilitate that happening.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. I found that being more direct, kind of like what you just said just now, is probably the most and again it goes back to, what you said. You have to know the person, right? I
Yes.
found being direct is the most appropriate approach. Like if I, saying like using you as an example, like Zach, what's going on, man? Like you just seem a little off right now. Like being direct and letting that person know that you feel that something is going on with them. I can't put a finger on it. And like you said, I'm not suggesting that anything is wrong. I could be completely, in left field waiting on a button. But at the end of the day, I've been knowing you for some years now. Something just seems a little off. What's going on, brother? Talk to me.
Yeah.
Right? When you be that direct and then extend the olive branch, sometimes they may say nothing's wrong. I'm fine. I'm good. But again, at least you're putting it out there. And I think, being in this particular environment where we are, where everybody wants to do things by text message and, barely pick up the phone and call and talk and things of that nature. And lo and behold, going by and laying eyes on a person, right?
Yeah.
Those things where we have a connection, but it's more of a distant connection than a more face-to-face connection. Those things
Yeah.
make it more difficult to actually be there for somebody who is dealing with depression. And on the other side, the person who is depressed, well, it gives them more of a reason not to open up and share, like, hey, I'm going through some things. I need some help.
And
Um,
it's easier to cover that up when you're posting
Absolutely.
stuff on Facebook or whatever, Instagram and yeah. And but that like you're saying with being direct, that is opening the door and it's very clear when you're doing it that hey, I'm worried about you. This is okay to talk about it because I'm asking you directly, is there something going on, as opposed to, hey, how are you doing? You're like, if you ask that, you're like, oh, I'm not going to burden someone with my shit.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. So I think
It,
that you hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah, man. We got to find a way to overcome the programmed responses. Like, you're walking down the street, you see somebody and say, "Hey, good morning." And then their automatic response is, "Good morning." Or some
Yeah.
find a way to overcome the automatic responses. Like ask a question that makes the automatic response impossible, and they really have to think about how they're going to respond. And if you do that, I think that person, and this is my hope, I hope that person feels that you care enough and you're concerned enough about them that you're asking and you want to be there for them. I think for me, that would have helped out a lot. Like, I am fortunate that I had kids because I'll be honest with you, brother, if I didn't have kids, I think I would, hopefully I would be in your situation. And that's hopefully. Um, but the thought of my kids being without a father was just too much for me to bear because I was raised and my father wasn't around. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So reflecting back on the things that I went through was the thing I did not want them to go through. So that was my thing. But I'm going back there. If somebody had known, and I'll say it that way, I'm not going to put it on the somebody saying it's their fault. But if somebody had known, if I wasn't so good at covering it up and putting on this facade, and they could peek through and see that, hey, you're hiding something. What's going on? Are you okay? I think that would have helped because that would have caused me to talk more. I would tell you it was an incident with me that happened and I blacked out, right? And I was
Yeah.
about to do something that I probably would have regret. And when I came back to, I had some family members holding me and we were in the street. One person had each arm, and then somebody else had their arm wrapped around me and said, "Man, are you okay? Like, we've never seen that look on your face. We really thought you was going to do something bad to that person." That's the thing that triggered me to go get help. Because I did not like not remembering anything that happened in my life. It's a scary thing for me to do. So that's what triggered me to start seeing a counselor and things of that nature. And I would tell you that's probably one of the best things that I've ever done. And
Yes.
and it's like it's an old movie called Antoine Fisher. I joke about it now. Um, to where Denzel Washington played the counselor and Antoine Fisher was a sailor who used to get in a lot of trouble. And it took him a while to open up to Denzel as a counselor. Well, that was me. It took me I would say it took me like 8 visits before I started opening up and really talking to him. And once I did so, I found that it was very therapeutic for me and it helped to talk about the things that I was going through. And so I'm only sharing that to our audience because don't expect immediate success when they decide to get some help. When they decide to sit down and talk, view them deciding to sit down to talk as a metric of success. And the more they continue to talk, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Zach. Well, I think you was in a different space when you started seeing a counselor. You wanted to help.
Yeah, I had a bullet hole in my forehead still. Like
Yeah,
it was while I was in the hospital.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, just we our metric of success a lot of time is that if we sit down, we expect them to talk. No, look at them sitting down with you as a metric of success.
Yeah.
But don't give up at that point. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, well, and I was just gonna add to that. I mean, it's not like when I shot myself, all of a sudden I could talk about that stuff scot-free. Like it sucked. And I talk about that a lot, just like I'm glad that you brought it up that hey, it's not a quick fix and like it's hard work and it's uncomfortable. And I used to leave my counseling sessions soaked in sweat, but
Mhm.
it does get easier. You're kind of sanding away layers of bullshit there as you go and talk through that stuff. And that's why I just I'll beat the dead horse on the it can and will get better if you show up and do that work.
Yes, absolutely. All right, real quick. Well, not real quick. You take as long as you want to.
Okay.
In the next 5 years, 5 to 10, it's your choice. Where does Zach Tidwell see himself at?
I've now been asked this a couple times and I'm realizing I need to come up with an answer because I don't I don't know, man. It's hard because I'm interested in a million different things. I've
Yes.
I've always been that way. So uh small goals. I want to place in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament as a blue belt. I've placed when I was a white belt and placed in a small tournament as a blue belt, but I haven't placed any big tournaments as a blue belt. So that would be a big thing for me. This book coming out is going to be so big because just having it out there, I'm not proud of a lot of stuff that is in the book, but I felt like I needed to write this for a long time, but I felt like I I definitely wasn't qualified or really in a place to put it out there because I'd learned these lessons, but I wasn't putting them into action because I was still dealing with alcoholism. And now that I'm sober, I feel like that's probably the best way for me to help people is having that out there. And it's because I'm just open about all the shit that I'm not proud of. And there's a lot of lessons to glean from that. And even, I speak to my opinions on a lot of these things, having been through them and being able to look back at them from the other side now. And I mean, I think that's the big thing is just having that out there and knowing that it's saved someone. I would really like to do something as well, either I guess both with the VA and the military for active duty service members on the suicide prevention side, because while I was in, we'd get suicide prevention stuff once a year, and it was some E3 or E4 reading off of a PowerPoint. No one was listening because he wasn't into it. I would like to have a more direct hand and something like that. And that's something I'm actually trying to facilitate right now. And we'll see if it goes anywhere. But that's my big goal, I guess, right
Gotcha.
now.
Yeah, I like it. Would you be willing to travel to do that? Go from like installation to installation talking to vets?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that that's possible with how many bases there are, but we'll see. We'll see what comes of it. But that's something that I'm actively trying to think through right now and try and get started or get involved with.
I love it. I love it. I know a few people in the on the government side of the house. Let me ask a few questions, see what I can figure out.
Okay.
And whatever I figure out, I definitely shoot it to you in a message. Listen, I am completely honored that you had this conversation with us today. I pray that your words of wisdom and experience that you shared today helps somebody. And in my opinion, if it helps one person who is going through depression decide to open up and talk about it, then I think that this conversation was 100% worth the time and effort. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, brothers, from sharing like I mean, taking all of the wheels off, like and you said it. You said I'm an open book, and I greatly appreciate that. So I want to thank you for being that for our audience. And again, just thank you for being Zach. Like there's no other Zach Tidwell in this world. And again, your story should be heard across the masses. So again, continue to doing what you do. Do not be surprised if I reach out to you to have another conversation, man, because I think you have so much to offer, man. And again, I'm extremely proud of you, brother.
I would love that. And thank you I mean, you opened up about some stuff too. And these are uncomfortable conversations. There's a lot of heavy stuff here. So I
Yep.
appreciate you taking the time for it. And thank you for the compliments. And I'd love to do this again at some point.
Absolutely, absolutely. Zach, my friend, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I really enjoyed this, dude. I
Me
really
too,
did.
man. Me as well. If you need anything, my friend, by all means, you know how to reach out to me. If you want me to do something for you, it doesn't matter what it is, just let me know. The worst thing I can say is no, right? But I try to find more of a reason to say yes than I do say no. If I say no, it's only because of a scheduling conflict, but I would try
Yeah.
to recommend a different date.
Okay.
I'm here to serve, my friend. I'm here to serve.
That goes both ways, dude. I don't have a huge network, but I have gotten connected with quite a few, you know, quite a few people over the past couple of years that I've opened up about this stuff. So,
Good, good.
yeah, door's
All right,
always
brother.
open.
Yes, sir. All right, brother. Colorado, right?
Yes, sir.
Hey, man. I know it's cold out there.
Oh, it sucks today right now, dude. It's been miserable the last couple of days.
I can imagine. I can
Yeah.
imagine. All right, brother. Have a good one, man. And we'll be talking soon.
All right, see ya.